Chapter 1. Why are you running? I'll race you to the corner, Ellen. Anne Mary adjusted the thick leather pack of her back so that her school books balanced evenly. Ready? She looked at her best friend. Ellen made a face. No, she said, laughing. You know I can't beat you. My legs aren't as long. Can't we just walk like civilized people? She was a stocky 10-year-old, unlike lanky Anne Mary. We have to practice for the athletic meet on Friday. I know. I'm going to win the girls' race this week. I was second last week, but I've been practicing every day. Come on, Ellen, Anne Mary pleaded, eyeing the distance to the next corner of the Copenhagen street. Please? Ellen hesitated, then nodded and shifted her own rucksack of books against her shoulders. Oh, all right. Ready? She said. Go, shouted Anne Mary, and the two girls were off, racing along the residential sidewalk. Anne Mary's silvery blonde hair flew behind her, and Ellen's dark pigtails bounced against her shoulders. Wait for me, hailed little Christy, left behind, but the two older girls weren't listening. Anne Mary outdistanced her friend quickly. Even though one of her shoes came untied and she sped along the street called Osterbrogge, past the small shops and cafes of her neighborhood. Here's the northeast Copenhagen. Laughing, she skirted an elderly lady in black who carried a shopping bag made of string. A young woman pushing a baby in a carriage moved aside to make way. The corner was just ahead. Anne Mary looked up, painting. Just as she reached the corner, her laughter stopped. Her heart seemed to skip a beat. Halte, the soldier ordered in a stern voice. The German word was as familiar as it was frightening. Anne Mary had heard it often enough before, but it had never been directed at her until now. Behind her, Ellen was slowed. Behind her, Ellen also slowed and stopped. Far back, little Christy was plodding along, her face in a pout because the girls hadn't waited for her. Anne Mary stared up. There were two of them. That meant 2 helmets, two sets of cold ice glaring at her, and 4 tall, shiny boots planted firmly on the sidewalk, blocking her path to home. And it meant 2 rifles gripped in the hands of the soldiers. She stared at the rifles first. Then, finally, she looked into the face of the soldier who had ordered her to halt. Why are you running? The harsh voice asked. His Danish was very poor. 3 years, Anne Mary thought with contempt. 3 years they've been in our country, and so they can't speak our language. I was racing with my friend, she answered politely. We have races at school every Friday, and I want to do well, so her voice trailed away, the sentence unfinished. Don't talk too much, she told herself. Just answer them, that's all. She glanced back. was motionless on the sidewalk. A few yards behind her, farther back, Christy was still sulking and walking slowly toward the corner. Nearby, a woman had come to the doorway of a shop and was standing silently watching. One of the soldiers, the taller one, moved toward her. Aunt Mary recognized him as the one she and Ellen always called in whispers, the giraffe, because his height and the long neck was extended from his stiff collar. He and his partner were always on the corner. He prodded the corner of her backpack with the stock of the rifle. Aunt Mary trembled. "What is in here?" she asked loudly. From the corner of the eye, she saw the shopkeeper move quietly back into the shadow of the doorways, out of sight. "School books," she answered truthfully. "Are you a good student?" the soldier asked. He seemed to be sneering. "Yes." "What is your name?" "Anne Mary Johnson." Your friend. Is she a good student too?" He was looking behind her at Ellen, who hadn't moved. Anne Mary looked back too, and saw that Ellen's face, usually rosy-cheeked, was pale, and her dark eyes were wide. She nodded at the soldier. "Better than me," she said. "What is her name?" "Ellen." "And who is this?" he asked, looking to Anne Mary's side. Christy had appeared there suddenly, scowling at everyone. "My little sister." She reached down for Christy's hand, but Christy, always stubborn, refused it and put her hands on her hips definitely. The soldier reached down and stroked her little sister's short, tangled curls. "Stand still, Christy," Aunt Mary ordered silently, praying that somehow the obstinate 5-year-old would receive the message. But Christy reached up and pushed the soldier's hand away. "Don't," she said loudly. But both soldiers began to laugh. They spoke to each other in rapid German that Anne Mary couldn't understand. She is pretty. She is pretty like my own little girl," the tall one said in a more pleasant voice. Anne Mary tried to smile politely. "Go home, all of you. Go study your school books. And don't run. You look like hoodlums when you run." The two soldiers turned away quickly. Anne Mary reached down again and grabbed her sister's hand before Christy could resist. Hurrying the little girl along, she rounded the corner. In a moment, Ellen was beside her. They walked quickly, not speaking, with Christy between them, towards the large apartment building where both families lived. When they were almost home, Ellen whispered suddenly, "I was so scared." "Me too," Aunt Mary whispered back. As they turned to enter their building, both girls looked straight ahead towards the door. They did it purposely so that they would not catch the eyes or the attention of 2 more soldiers who stood with their guns on the corner as well. Christy scurried ahead of them through the door, chattering about the picture she was bringing home from kindergarten to show Mama. For Christy, the soldiers were simply part of the landscape, something that had always been there, on every corner, as unimportant as lampposts throughout her remembered life. Are you going to tell your mother? Ellen asked. Aunt Mary asked Aunt Ellen asked Aunt Mary as they strode together up the stairs. I'm not. My mother would be upset. No, I won't either. Mama would probably scold me for running on the street. She said goodbye to Ellen on the second floor, where Ellen lived, and continued on to the third, practicing in her mind a cheerful greeting for her mother, a smile, a description of today's spelling test, and which she had done well. But she was too late. Christy had gotten there first. And she poked Aunt Mary's book bag with his gun. And then he grabbed my hair. Christy was chattering as she took off her sweater in the center of the apartment living room. But I wasn't scared. Aunt Mary was, and Ellen too, but not me. Mrs. Jonasson rose quickly from the chair by the window where she'd been sitting. Mrs. Rosen, Ellen's mother, was there too, in the opposite chair. They'll be having coffee together, as they did at many afternoons. Of course, it wasn't really coffee, though the mother still called it that, having coffee. There had been no real coffee in Copenhagen since the beginning of the Nazi occupation. Not even any real tea. My mother sipped a hot water flavored with herbs. Aunt Mary, what happened? What is Christy talking about? Her mother asked anxiously. Where's Ellen? Mrs. Rosen had a frightened look. Ellen's in your apartment. She didn't realize you were here. Aunt Mary explained. Don't worry. It wasn't anything. It was just two soldiers who stand on the corner of Osterbrook. You've seen them. You know the tall one with the long neck, the one who looks like a silly giraffe, she told her mother and Mrs. Rosen of an incident, trying to make it sound humorous and unimportant, but their uneasy looks didn't change. I slapped his hand and shouted at him, Christy announced importantly. No, she didn't, Mama, Aunt Mary reassured her mother. She's exaggerating, as she always does. Mrs. Jonasson moved to the window as she looked down to the street below. The Copenhagen neighborhood was quiet. It looked the same as always. People coming and going from the shops. Children at play, the soldiers on the corner. She spoke in a low voice to Ellen's mother. They must be edgy because of their latest residence incidents. Did you read in the Friedenske about the bombing in Hillerød and Nordbro? Although she pretended to be absorbed in unpacking her school books, Aunt Mary listened, and she knew what her mother was referring to. The Friedens was an illegal newspaper. Peter Nielsen brought it to them. Occasionally, carefully folded and hidden among was an illegal newspaper. Peter Nielsen brought it to them occasionally, carefully folded and hidden among ordinary books and papers. And Mama always burned it after she and Papa had read it. But Anne Mary heard Mama and Papa talk sometimes at night about the news they received that way. News of sabotage against the Nazis. Bombs hidden and exploded in the factories that produce war materials, and industrial railroad lines damaged so that the goods couldn't be transported. And she knew what residence meant. Papa had explained. When she overheard the word and asked, the residence fighters were Danish people. No one knew who, because they were very secret. Who were determined to bring harm to the Nazis, however they could. They damaged the German trucks and cars and bombed their factories. They're very brave. Sometimes they were caught and killed. I must go speak to Ellen, Mrs. Rosen said, moving toward the door. You girls walk a different way to school tomorrow. Promise me, Anne Mary. And Ellen will promise to. We will, Mrs. Rosen. But what does it matter? There are German soldiers on every corner. They will remember your faces, Mrs. Rosen said, turning in the doorway to the hall. It is important to be one of the crowd, always. Be one of many. Be sure that they never have reason to remember your faces. She disappeared into the hall and closed the door behind her. He'll remember my face, Mama, Christy announced happily. Because, he said, I look like his little girl. He said I was pretty. If he had such a pretty girl, why doesn't he go back to a good father? Mrs. Jonathan murmured, stroking Christy's cheek. Why doesn't he go back to his own country? Mama, is there anything to eat? Anne Mary asked, hoping to take her mother's mind away from the soldiers. Take some bread and give a piece to your sister. With butter? Christy asked hopefully. No butter, her mother replied. You know that. Christy sighed as Anne Mary went to the bread box in the kitchen. I wish I could have a cupcake, she said. A big yellow cupcake with pink frosting. Her mother laughed. For a little girl, you have a long memory, she told Christy. There hasn't been any butter or sugar for cupcakes for a long time. A year, at least. When will there be cupcakes again? When the war ends, Mrs. Jonathan said. She glanced through the window, down the street corner where where the soldiers stood, their faces impassive beneath the metal helmets. When did the soldiers leave?